Folks, the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ is back. And on this episode, we have Jeff Snyder from Jeff's Resurrections down in Taylor, Texas. This is a man who's been restoring cars for things like Pebble Beach and Amelia Island and basically does some of the best restorations in the world. So we're going to be talking with him in a minute about what goes into actually bringing a car back to life and making it, well, perfect again. But before we do that, we always pick a car from the Hemmings Classifieds, of which we have 25 to 30,000 cars online, both in print and online, as well as our Hemmings auction. Now, because Jeff does these amazing restorations, we chose something a little different for him in the form of a 1937 Ford Monoposto Indy style race car. Now, it's a recreation, but it's still kind of cool. I mean, we're talking about pizza cutters for tires, wire wheels, single seat, no doors. And I got to be honest, it's probably mildly sketchy to drive, but my God, just look at it. So we're going to take a little dive into this. We'll show it to Jeff and we'll be back with him in, I don't know, 2 or 3 seconds. Talk to you soon. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ podcast. With me today is Jeff Snyder of Jeff's Resurrections in Taylor, Texas. Now, so Jeff is one of those guys who you may have not known you've seen his work, but if you've ever been to Amelia Island, if you've ever been to Pebble Beach, if you've ever been to the Quail Motor Car Gathering, odds are you've seen some of his work. So, Jeff, welcome to the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ podcast. Thanks for joining us. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about restorations. More importantly, I guess, you guys have been doing restorations for years. The work that you do is absolutely outstanding.
Thank you.
Loads of awards from just about every concourse all over the country. But how did you get into doing this? How did Jeff's Resurrections start?
It was actually just a hobby that I picked up when I was in high school and, working on my own cars and working on friends' cars. And then just kind of went from there in the late 80s, decided to just do this instead of my full-time profession.
Which was what at the time?
I'm actually a 3rd generation funeral director. So
really?
I traded one kind of body for another.
Okay, that's pretty amazing. Okay, so this is going to sound like an odd question, but are there any similarities to restoring an automobile that equate to restoring a human for a funeral?
Actually, there probably is, because both of them are very detail oriented. I don't know how many funerals you've been to, but when I worked for my grandfather and my father, every detail counted, because this is the last time that this family's going to see mom or dad or grandma or Uncle Bill or whoever it might be. So every detail has to be right. And every car has to be clean. So at the age of 9 or 10, if I wasn't in school, I would walk across the street to our funeral home and I would be washing cars and detailing cars. And my pay was Dr. Pepper's, 10, 2, and 4, we had Dr. Pepper breaks. So I was detailing cars very, very early on, and it just kind of went from there. I've just always been a car person. So it's just kind of a natural thing to be able to do.
Oh, wow. Okay. So when you started restoring cars, did you start off, I guess as many of us did, right? You started off, kind of detailing cars. And then when did you start, or when did the bug kick in for more in-depth work like mechanics and paint and body and all in interior and all the things that go along with it? And I guess, when did you feel that you had, I guess, the skill set to do that, or was that just learned over time and experience?
Yeah, the skill set is something that I'm still learning. I mean, every restoration is a new challenge, and we learn different things and try different techniques and try and put our mindset into the way that car was built in 1915 or 1945 or 1970. So you're constantly changing things up and modifying your mindset to try and put yourself in what the position that they had and the tools that they had available. But ever since I was probably 12 or 13, I wanted to work on cars and have cars and hot rods. And I was really fortunate. There's a a little place here in town where I grew up called Speedy's Garage. And
Okay.
it was a group of guys that one or two guys, I think, were renting the building, but it was where all the car guys hung out. And they either hung out there to work on their cars, or they hung out there to drink beer, or maybe just get away from their wives and have
Right.
some weekend time, you know, with the guys. But I was one of the fortunate few. There was a few of us kids that they would just let us hang out. And they would, after a while, you know, when they saw that, hey, you know, this guy really wants to help us work on a car, they'd let you help sand or clean parts or whatever.
Right.
So from about 13, 14, I would ride my bicycle down there and just help them out. And it
Oh,
just
wow.
got to where more and more time, you know, you get to spend time down there, and, you know, you were helping them work on their cars, and you learn how to do this and learn how to do that. And a lot of stuff I learned may or may not have been correct, but
Right.
that was the way that, you know, we did it. And it just kind of blossomed from there. And then I bought my first car when I was 16, and, you know, I've been playing with cars ever since, my own
So,
and other people's.
so basically it was just kind of a, an unsolicited internship that you probably didn't know you were getting at the time.
Absolutely, it was. Yeah, it was, and it was fun. You know, we were just the two or three of us kids that they'd let help out. We were just part of the group, and we got to help out. And, you know, as long as it wasn't too dangerous, they didn't give us too many power tools.
Right.
But you know, we got to do. We had a lot of fun, and we, you know, when I run into those guys, they're still car guys, and we still talk about the times at Speedy's Garage.
Oh, that's
It was
cool.
just a lot of fun. Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a terrible way to grow up. And you're a
Yeah.
Texan, you're a native Texan, correct?
Actually, not native. I was born in Muncie, Indiana, but my
Okay.
family moved down here when we were 10 for my father to go into the family business with my
Gotcha.
grandfather.
Okay.
So,
So you figured out by hanging around this garage that you were into cars and you would watch these guys work on cars. Got your first car when you were 16, which was a what?
it was a 76 Chevy van
Yeah,
that had
I
been
just bought a
in
76 Chevy van.
Pennsylvania. I saw that on one of the other shows. Yeah. Yeah, 76 Chevy van from Pennsylvania, and it was totally rusted out. Um, didn't know how to use a welder, and I spent, I don't know, 2 or 3 years piecing it back together. And because I didn't have access to all the metal fabrication tools, some of the stuff was done in fiberglass. And, you
Right.
know, JC Whitney was my favorite catalog,
Yeah.
and, you know, the flares from JC Whitney and this and
Absolutely.
that. But in the end, it turned out really cool. I put it was flared. It was a C10, so it was the short van.
Yep, that's what I have.
No
Yeah.
windows. The side door and the back door. I found this guy that was building the doors out of fiberglass, and they were hinged at the top, so it had gull wing doors.
Oh, wow. Do you have any
It
pictures
was
of that
cool.
thing? If you
Yeah, I
do,
do somewhere. Yeah.
you need to send me some photos of that because I want to see
Okay.
that. So,
Yeah, it was
all right.
fun.
So you get your van, you start restoring that, not knowing anything about how to restore a vehicle, but you knew the way that it was supposed to go back together, kind of in your head. Um, when did you make that leap to say, or I guess, how many cars did it take you to work on to where you said, you know what, I think I can make a go at this. I think I can make a living at bringing cars back to life.
I don't know how many cars, but I think I was 23 when I decided to leave the funeral business and just start my shop.
Okay. And do you remember the first car you did for a customer?
It was an Alpha Giulietta.
Wow. So you dove in with, you dove in.
Yeah, and the car is actually still around. Last I heard, it's in Japan
Wow.
with the same paint that it had on it when I painted it in 1987, no, 89 or.
Huh. So what do you have a range? Because you mentioned earlier, like, cars like pre-war cars and stuff. Is there like, do you have a range from like 1900 to, I don't know, 2000 or something like that? Like where does the basis of your restorations, where do they fall in?
The oldest car we restored is a 1906 Cadillac.
Wow.
Um, and then most of the cars we kind of stop at about 71.
Okay.
71 Cudas, Corvettes, anything we do a little bit of work after
Yeah.
71, but not too much.
Okay.
Almost all of our
So,
cars are all carbureted cars.
okay. Now that makes sense. So let me ask you, when people come to you, and I think that a lot of people that want to get cars restored, right? They have an idea of what it takes to get a car restored, but they don't really know. Like most people I've always find they have somewhat of a grasp on mechanics, they can get that, but when it comes to paint, body, fabrication, interior, they have no clue the amount of time, effort, and skill that goes into actually bringing these vehicles back to life. What's it like setting an expectation for a client that comes to you? How does that go?
That's like giving somebody a revolver with one bullet short of a full chamber, because every car is totally different. You could, if all you did was restore 65 Mustangs, if you laid out and did a spreadsheet of how many hours it took to do this one versus this one versus this one, it's never going to be the same,
Right.
because they're all treated different. Some are garage, some are not. How many times did you get washed? How bad did the trunk leak? How bad did the windshield leak? So
Right.
it's nearly impossible to give any kind of a number. You can give a range based on something that you've done in the past, but to give a solid number, I just don't do, because it's not fair to me and it's not fair to the customer.
Sure.
Because at some point, if somebody says, I'm going to restore your car for 50 grand and everything is completely worn out and you've got 40,000 in parts and you've paid your guys another $30,000 in labor and you're still
Right.
not done, where are you going to start compromising to meet that budget? And
Right.
I just don't like to be in that position where I feel like I have to compromise our quality and the longevity of our restoration just to meet someone's budget. It's just not fair to the car.
What was that a learning experience for you when you first started in business to
For
say,
sure.
yeah.
For sure.
Okay. So
Yeah.
when somebody comes in and they say, I've got this, I've got whatever it is, a 1930 something, whatever, it's a Packard or Buick, whatever the case is. At this point in time, these are almost 100-year-old vehicles, right? Some are
Right.
100-year-old vehicles. If parts aren't available, what do you do? How do you find them? Do you have to make parts? Is it, again, this goes back to kind of the expectations of the client, but do you ever talk somebody out of restoring a car, I guess is what I'm trying to ask, based on what they start with?
Almost on a daily basis.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah, at least weekly. There's someone that calls and says, "Oh, I really want to restore this," and I'm like, "Sir, if you look at the value of your car restored and the value of what it and the cost of to restore the car, you're never going to make it up unless for
Right.
some reason the value of that car just exponentially increases." So
Right.
you just have to, and there's cars that we still restore that the owner knows that it'll never be worth what the cost of the restoration is, but because it was father's car or grandfather's
Yeah.
car, it doesn't matter.
Right.
So you just restore it because it's a passion. And I think most collectors, it's a passion. There are groups of guys that pack the numbers and it's like, well, I can't spend more than this and that. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, then, maybe you need to restore something else,
Right. Right. Right.
because
Right.
it's just not going to work.
So if somebody does come to you and they have I don't know, say an E-type Jag or an Alpha or a late 60s, 70s Ferrari or something like that, right? Um, when parts literally aren't available, right? What do you do? I mean, we live in a world of 3D printing and stuff like that. Do you find yourself actually constructing your own parts, I guess, to complete
Sure.
these? Oh, you
Sure.
do?
Oh yeah. If it's sheet metal, it's no big deal. We've got a full sheet metal fab shop, so we just make the panels. But if it comes to something complicated like a casting,
Yeah.
we just hopefully we have the original piece. It's
Okay.
amazing how much you can rebuild of an original piece with today's
Really?
technology. You can, if you've got a surface that the bearing race has chewed up, you can have that hard chromed and cut down and restore that part. There's a lot you can do to restore the part. But if
Okay.
you just don't have the part, if you don't, if you have a drawing, you can restore it from the drawing. We restored a Bizzarini last year that won its class at Amelia Island,
Okay.
and the calipers are magnesium. Well,
Right.
magnesium is
Yeah.
not a good choice for brake
For
calipers
brakes. No.
because if they ever caught fire, they're done. The
Yeah,
car's
you
gone,
finished.
and they're real porous.
Yeah.
So every 3 or 4 months, they just leak out. The air leaches in and
Yeah.
soils the pedal. So we're actually building a set of calipers out of billet aluminum,
Oh,
just
wow.
completely redesigning the whole deal. But we have an original caliper to go by,
Okay.
so we know exactly what it's supposed to look like. But with modern 5-axis machines, these things will be identical down to the raised lettering, and then it'll come to us with a machine surface,
Right.
and then you just take a needle scaler and give the whole thing a once over with the needle scaler, and it puts that cast look to it, and nobody will ever know. But
Huh.
these calipers will last forever.
So
We're
I get,
re-engineering the pistons and the whole bit.
okay. So I guess that brings up another question, which is if you're doing a vehicle for, say, like a Pebble or an Amelia or something like that, where it has to be 100% original, um, and a client brings you like Bizzarini and it's got magnesium calipers, do you stick with the magnesium calipers or do you remanufacture them in billet and make them look like that? I mean, because there does come a point where it is a safety thing. And granted, these old cars, we know
Sure.
they're not safe, but how do you negotiate that? How does that work? And if the car is shown, how do you navigate the judging of that?
Well, the judges, for the most part, understand the safety thing. And even in the Corvette world, the NCRS world, they typically don't knock off if you've got brake hoses that don't have the correct date code from 1967 on them, because
Okay.
it is a safety issue. So they give you a little bit of leeway on that, but we can make those calipers look like they are magnesium, and we already know how to do it. We've done it with other parts. So it's just it's a matter of finishes. It's just like we've devised ways to make a cast iron part that's supposed to be bare cast iron, make it look like cast iron, but it has a coating on it to where it won't rust. And we've actually had judges say, well, those look really good, but they almost look too good. We know you have a coating on there, but we can't tell that there's a coating on there. So we have to just give you a standard deduction, or we'll give you a minor deduction. Or sometimes they're just like, well, you've done such a good job of disguising it that we're just going to give it to you because you've got it figured out. So, and
Yeah.
that's one thing we work on all the time is on our restorations, I want the finishes to be right and I want the textures to be right.
Okay.
A few years ago, we were working with the guy that 2 or 3 bikes that we've done when we were doing bikes with this guy won the Quail.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And one of the bikes that we did was a really, really early Vincent. And everyone was talking about this bike at the show. And they're like, it's because the whole bike is black. So how do
Right.
you make a black bike with every component stand out? Well, you make sure that all the cast pieces have the cast look. And everywhere where the cast flashing was that they grind off, you make sure that shows through the finish. You don't
Right.
just load it up with a bunch of primer and make it all kind of disappear into this black blob. So, and it was really fun just walking around during the show, and people were talking about, yeah, did you look at that, Vincent? Did you see all the way that the black was textured and all the black, we paint it in different batches, so it's slightly different
Yeah.
tinted, just so it doesn't look like just some black thing that was painted out of a
Right.
can of Rust-Oleum.
Right.
And that makes a difference because you have 2 cars, one was restored by these guys and one was restored by these guys. And we all kind of look at the way our perception of what the restoration should be. And most guys just paint everything out of the same can.
Right.
And then you look at our car and it's like, oh, this just looks different. And I don't know why I like it, but it's all the texture and the minimal amount of coatings on stuff. So you see all this little detail and all the individual components.
Okay, so then
It makes a
that
difference.
oh, and I would assume it would have to, right? Because I mean, when things are, and I've seen vehicles that are over restored, right? And I think that that's something. But if so, for instance, if you have something that came in, and I mean, back in the day, there were no stampings, right? So many of these panels, if they were aluminum or whatnot, that were hand beaten. So there are marks in the metal and things of that nature. Can you, and I guess, do you recreate that so when people see it, they go, okay, well, this paint is correct for the time. And granted, like, chemicals have changed over time, paint has changed over time. Is there a way to get the look of like a 1916 Cadillac and still have, I guess, similarities between the way original paint looked with what is offered today by companies?
Sure. Yeah. And we do it pretty much on a daily basis. Lacquer's not available, but all the Corvettes until 1982 were sprayed in lacquer. So we've figured out ways to take modern urethanes and put flattening agents and maybe a little reducer and its gun technique to get that kind of lacquer look and that lacquer sheen, definition of image,
Right.
which is not, the same at the top of the car than at the side of the car. And the jams are even more dull. So we have to learn how to, over time, we've learned how to play with the finishes to get that look.
So do
Um,
you, I mean, would you, I mean, and I'm sure you've seen them over the course of your career, but when you find an original car, right? Like if you find something like a 30,000 mile garage car or whatever the case is, right? Will you look at those cars and really study them and take photos of them to say, okay, this is the way this came? Like, how does that go? Because I think, we're getting to the point where these cars, especially from the 60s and 70s, they're 50, 60 years old at this point. Real prime original examples are getting harder and harder to find. What is your process in, I guess, when you're restoring to say, okay, well, I know what the original looks like. Like, how do you get in touch, so to speak, with an original vehicle so that you can reproduce it or resurrect it?
you just uh, you just start making phone calls and making friends and doing little favors and sending pecans to people and sending barbecue to people and yeah, and you just try and get your foot in the door. I mean, we restored a GT40 a few years ago that had been it's a well-known road car that was made into a race car and it was raced for decades. And the owner wanted to make it into a road car again. So huge task, huge.
Yeah.
So I hopped planes a half a dozen times to go look at an original car that was either restored or unrestored and just to kind of pick out the fine points of each one. There was none of them that were perfect,
Right. Yeah, because
untouched
they were all
examples.
hand built, right?
Right. And there's variations from one car to the next because they were all hand
Yeah.
built. But it's the same for any car. If we're doing a Corvette and I'm at a Corvette meet, if there's original cars there, I could care less about the restored cars. I go look at the survivor cars and take
Yeah.
pictures of the way that the paint line is and where the overspray is and the paint runs and all that things that people think are goofy, just so we know when we restore a car, we know how to put all those details back, inspection marks, all those little details, because that to me is a perfect restoration.
Okay.
And a lot of people say it's over restored, but to me, it's not. I mean, we're restoring them as if the guys on the line had all the time in the world to make sure that everything they did that day was perfect.
Okay.
That's what we're trying to achieve.
Okay. When you do restore these cars, I mean, obviously, the vehicles, certain vehicles will take longer, and shorter rather, what is a typical, or is there no typical time that it takes to restore a car? Can a car take a year or could it take 15 years depending on parts and things like that? Like, how do you determine how long? Like, if a customer comes in and be like, I have this Ford GT and I want it restored. Give me a time frame. Do you just look at them and be like, yeah, I don't know how long it's going to take? Like, how does that conversation go?
Yeah, sometimes it is that way. We restored a Hemi Cuda that actually still has the world's record the Hemi Cuda coupe, sold for a little over $1 million. We restored that car in 5 months and 20 days.
Wow. Wow.
But super, compared to a lot of the cars we do, super, super easy cars. Chryslers of the late 60s, early 70s, the quality of the manufacturing and the assembly
terrible.
was horrible, but the engineering behind those cars was exceptional. Because you can completely restore that car and have everything, every sub-assembly set on a bench, ready to go. And we can take that car off the rotisserie and have it on the ground with the drivetrain in it in an hour.
Wow.
Because the engine sits on the K-member, just like a modern car. Sits on the K-member, all the suspension is built.
Yep.
4 bolts, upper control arms, torsion bars, front end's done.
Right.
Rear end, 4 bolts. So, you just have to be able to kind of, the key to getting restorations done fast is to have all those sub-assemblies completely done. Okay. And make sure that when you do the coach work part of the car, you take that thing apart and put it, strip it to metal or send it out and have it e-coated, which we do. Put it back together in the bare metal, make sure everything fits, do all the priming and blocking, and then pull it apart again. And you may do that 3 or 4 times. So when you finally do the final assembly, you've eliminated as many unknowns as possible. It should theoretically go together just like it did the 5 times before, which it never does.
Right,
but,
of course.
Well, so that's just the way it goes.
If you pull away from the mechanics and you go into the interior, okay. So, and I've got 2 old Chryslers. I've got a 68 and a 69, and then I've got a couple others. As in the 70s, right? And as we kind of go into the mid 70s and stuff, the materials used on the interior were just beyond terrible. And it's, when you talk about things like door panels and kick panels, especially we were talking Chryslers, they would literally vaporize and turn to powder, right? Like I think we've all seen like the door panels or the door or the seat backs that like you could scratch with your fingernail and it comes off in a powder. So how is that reproduced? And to be like new, or do you buy stuff from, I guess, an aftermarket supplier? And if you do that, if it's not an original piece, do you have to kind of like, I don't want to say dumb down the reproduction part, but how do you do that?
Yeah, well, you try and find original pieces as much as possible. And that sometimes sometimes it's not possible.
Yeah.
But if you look long enough and if you have a schedule permitting, you just try and find it. But a little hint, on all those late 60s and the General Motors cars were the same way.
Yeah.
All those door panels and the seat backs, as long as they're black, the black ones are still pristine. There's something in the black that gives it a little bit extra UV protection. So when we're looking for parts for those cars, I always try and find the black ones, and then we just have to dye them. I mean, that's the only thing you can do. But blues, greens, whites, beiges, they just turn to powder. But the black ones are always pristine. It's crazy.
Noted.
Yeah,
I remember.
So always look for the black panels.
That's a great tip, because I remember I had a 69 Grand Prix SJ, and it was a phenomenal. I love that car. But the panels, like the kick panels and the seat backs, were literally disintegrating.
Seat backs are the same as a Chevelle.
Right, in the Grand Prix. Yeah. Yep. So I was always kind of curious about that. When it comes to, I guess, what do you say no to? I guess, if there's a car that comes in and, you've talked to the owner and they're super, super persistent. Is there a time that you just go, all right, man, listen, if you got all the money in the world, if you need me to build this thing from nothing, I'll build it from nothing. Like, is there a point where you just go, I'm not doing this. It's too much of a headache. And do the personnel, I guess the flip side, the other side of that would be, do you turn people away because of personalities?
I try not to. I try and give everybody the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
Because to me, it's about the car, not about the person. And I typically can work with most anyone. There's a few people that have been challenging, but we usually work through the issues. And
Hmm.
And the car is perfect, beautiful when it's done and it does well, whether it's being auctioned or shown or whatever.
Okay.
Um, but if the car is to the point it's so rusty that there's not much of the car left, so in
Hmm.
the end, you really don't have the essence of the car anymore. I just won't do it,
Gotcha.
because at that point it's just considered a rebody.
Right. Yeah, I guess.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah. There's not much of the original left. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I always, you see these cars that they get restored and they're stunning pieces, regardless of the year, make, and model they are. How many after they're restored actually get driven? Or do the owners a lot of times look at them and they say, you know what, it's a vehicle, yes, it's supposed to be driven, but at what point do they take the place of a vehicle and transform into a piece of modern art or a piece of art that is not driven, right? Because when
I
you're
would
done with
say
them,
it's
you know,
yeah, I would say it's half and half.
okay.
And that's just totally based on the customer. We finished cars and shipped them to Phoenix and drove them to Vegas with 60 miles on the restoration. And then there's been other cars that have never seen hardly the road other than in the trailer, into the event, and back in the trailer. So, but we try and make our cars to where they can be driven if they decide to drive them.
Okay.
And more, the trailer queens are being less and less, because a lot of these events, the concours events, are also have driving tours.
Okay.
They want to encourage the owners to drive their cars. So the drive may be 15 miles, or it may be 60 miles or 75 miles. And you kind of get extra credit, or you get, if the day of this concours, there's two cars that are so close to the same score that it's like a coin toss to which one's better. The one that did the tour gets the nod.
Okay. Is it
So,
is it is it
and at
difficult for
one
you?
point, even a restored car, at some point, if it's used, or even if it's 10 or 15 years after it's restored, they're going to deteriorate some. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a thing, zinc and cad are sacrificial coatings. They're going to
Yeah.
diminish over time. So at some point, somebody's going to give up that car. Maybe it's after they get all their trophies, and they're going to sell the car, and the next guy's going to drive the hell out of it. So it has to be to where whenever at that point, you can drive the car without having to go back and re-restore. Oh, well, we got to change all this out because it wasn't intended to be driven.
Right.
You know,
Do you so as somebody who loves cars, who restores them, does everything else, do you try to get your customers to drive their car? Like I always view vehicles as I understand what it takes to restore cars. I understand the value, I understand the monetary input, right? And the time. But I can't ever see owning something, regardless of what it is, and not driving the hell out of it, right?
right.
Like I always tell everybody, I was like, I am not saving my car for the next owner. I just absolutely refuse to do that. I will drive it into the ground and then I'll restore it and then I'll drive it into the ground again and I'll restore it and then I'll do it again. But
That's the cool thing about cars. You
yeah,
could do that 50 times. I mean, I would say a good majority of our restorations are cars that have been restored before in the past, whether
right,
well or not so well, you know.
right. So yeah, that is. Do you have that conversation with owners? Be like, listen, man, like with that GT40, like, how do you own, like, you spend all this money on a GT40, you get it restored, it's an original car. How do you not drive it? Like, I've got a buddy that he's a dear friend, and he just bought a 289 Cobra, an original 289 Cobra. He's like, I am going to drive the ever loving crap out of this thing, regardless of the value. He's like, I've always wanted one. He's like, I'm gonna beat it to death. I'm gonna take it out and I'm gonna run it and I'm gonna drive it and I'm gonna do exactly what Carroll Shelby intended this car to do. I'm gonna use it. So do you try to push that on owners, or do you find most owners are a little gun shy when it comes to doing stuff like that?
I don't really try and push it on them, but I encourage them to drive them, because I don't want to see it back because it just sat in the garage and the fuel system's fouled up and the brakes are leaking and this and that. I want it to be driven, and we try and drive every car before we release it to the customer. We're
Right.
fortunate being close to Austin. I've got 2 professional racetracks that I can just call up the
Mm-hmm.
guys and say,
Yeah.
hey, we got a car where we need to drive it. And can I just bring it out to the track and I just want to drive around the track. I'm not trying to
Right.
set any laps, but I just want to drive it and just shake it down and heat cycle the engine a few times and hit the brakes hard a few times and not
Yep.
worry about grandma running a stop sign.
That's
And we also
fantastic.
have a chassis dyno as well. So we'll chassis dyno the cars to make sure that the drivetrain's good. And then we load it in the trailer and take it to one of the tracks and just drive it around and spend the day. And we try and encourage the owner to come down so he can drive the car at the track. So that way he familiarizes himself with the car as well. So when he does get the car at his house, he can just hop in it and go, and it'll just be like an old pair of sneakers that he's worn 50,000 times.
That's interesting. That's using, and I don't know why I just never thought of it, but like using a racetrack to break in miles, especially on some of these ultra high value cars. I honestly can't think of a better way to do it. I mean, like you said, you're not going out there to set a lap time, but talk about a controlled environment that you don't have to worry about anything, that you
Right.
can really test everything from acceleration to brakes to squeaks and rattles to everything that goes into a car. That's brilliant. Wow. I
Yeah,
love that.
it works out really well. So, and we try and do that with pretty much every car.
Wow.
It just saves us a lot of time.
So
That way, when the
how,
customer gets the car, they can have a trouble-free car that they can have fun with.
yeah. How many cars do y'all
Things
do a
still
year?
break, but
Well, stuff always
um,
breaks.
yeah, it doesn't matter. Uh, we don't probably do, but maybe 2 or 3 or 4 restorations, full restorations a year, because we
Okay.
do a lot of service work. I mean, I've been restoring cars for over 30 years.
Okay.
And if the cars stay in the local area, I'm the guy that takes, me and my crew take care of the cars. So
Right.
we've constantly got cars in for service and more, the guys that I felt were my mentors, those guys are all retired. So I'm the guy that's taking care of a lot of the collector cars around the Austin area and beyond. I
Okay.
mean, we get cars in from all over the country as well, but we've got a lot of Austin area, Houston, Dallas clients that they send their cars to us and they wouldn't send them to
Okay.
anybody else. So we take
Okay.
care of a lot of, service cars. Plus we've got a full metal shop, body shop, 2 spray booths. So we do a lot of classic car collision
Okay.
repair when
Okay.
that happens as well. So we're
So
a full service shop. I mean, we try and do as much in-house as possible.
okay. You do interior,
We
paint,
do
body,
most
mechanics, the whole
interior
bit.
stuff. Some stuff we send out if it's really,
Okay.
really complicated, but seat covers for a 69 Chevelle. I mean, we can certainly do that, or
Yeah.
68 Roadrunner, because they're already
Sure.
done. I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel. It's not like trying to recreate the interior in a 68 Bizzarini
Right.
that was
Right.
all hand stitched and nobody makes a kit for. I mean, those you have to buy the hides and recreate everything. And when we do that, we did an Auburn a few years ago, and the interior, the car had been restored by a
Mhm.
well-known shop, and 6 years into the restoration, the car was just falling apart,
Oh,
and the
geez.
interior was horrible, and this and that. And we ended up, a client bought it, and we looked at it close, and he's like, "Just take it apart, just tear it apart, and let's just redo the whole car."
Oh,
So where do you find somebody with an interior for that? But I found a guy up in the Northwest that took an interior out of an Auburn 40 years ago. And he said, I won't send it to you, but if you'll come look at it, if you want to come look at it, you can. So I called the client and said, hey, can I go to fly to Minneapolis tomorrow and look at an interior for your car? And he's like, Minneapolis? Why? I said, this is a totally original interior in boxes. And if you want this interior to be right and perfect down to the
yeah.
thread count, this is what we got to do. And he's like, all right, we'll go do it. So hop a plane, go up there, lay all the interior out, take 200 pictures down to the thread count and
Wow.
the little rivets and what's on the back. And, it still even had the guy that put this door cards together. It still had his initials on the back of it. So we reproduced all that stuff. So,
How?
but I mean, that's the key, to me, that's the best part of the restoration, is that every single detail down to the signature on the back of cards and paint marks and counting the thread and, getting the pattern right on,
Yeah.
the way that the seats are laid out. And
So
that's, to me, is the fun part.
I mean, between the hunt and you had mentioned earlier, like your mentors are retired right now. So you're that guy. So do you have any issues about, like, do you have kids that want to come in? Do you have young people that are coming in and saying, listen, I really want to know about this? Or are you finding that's getting more and more difficult? Because I've spoken to a lot of shop owners and, it's either they have generally few people that are coming in or like, a lot of times they say that we get people that come in, but they don't stick with it. They realize the amount of actual work that it is because it is an enormous amount of work. And then they kind of go away. But are you having problems finding people, younger people to get into this industry?
It's a challenge, but if you get somebody that walks in and they want a job, they've got the passion. You're halfway there. If you don't have the passion to do restoration, then you're just not going to be a good restorer. You've got to have an open mind. You've got to be willing to think outside of the box, and you've got to have the passion every day. And I'm really fortunate, even though we have a relatively small crew, 10 guys, if I could find 10 more guys with the passion, I would hire them because we got the work.
Right.
But there's, and a good number of my guys are young guys. So there's a couple good, schools around that are cranking out some guys with good basic knowledge. They think they know everything. But you typically you can knock that chip off their shoulder within a few weeks because they realize it's like, yeah, they didn't teach me how to do this and they didn't teach me how to do that. But this guy's just making this look way too easy. And it's like, well, regardless of how they taught you how to do it this way and see what you think. Oh, that's way easier and it's faster and it's better results. It's like, so their education, they've realized within a few weeks that their education is continuing. They may have a degree, but that's just getting them in the door. Right. And some of them stick with it and some of them don't. Okay. But, and that's okay. And some of them end up thinking, well, I know more than this guy and I'm going to open my own shop. And that's good too, because competition's good for business. Because now they already know all my secrets. So now it's like, all right, so here's the bar. And so now they know all that. They think they're going to knock me off the chair. I'm going to just raise the bar up to here. Right. And we constantly do that. We're constantly working on modifying our finishes and coming up with new equipment and better ways of doing this and more modern techniques to use on the old stuff. So is the minute you realize that, well, I'm as good as I'm going to get and I'm happy with that, everybody's going to surpass you. Because if you look at things that were restored 30 and 40 years ago, it's not the same level that things are restored now. The level of detail is tremendous nowadays. And it's not just the overall detail, it's the detail down to every nut and bolt. And if you don't have that, you may lose your class in an event because you've got some Phillips screws on a pre-war car.
Does that get frustrating? Like when you, I mean, having to know literally every nut and bolt, and you mentioned thread count, and that has to be the amount of literature and detailed notes and photographs that you must have accumulated over the last 30 years. That must be enormous. You must have a library that's huge.
Yeah, it's pretty big. And I've got, tens of thousands of images that I've taken. Anytime I am somewhere, whether it be a wrecking yard or a car show or a concours, and I see original cars, I just take the pictures. Because and maybe not even of a car that I'm currently working on or I have in the queue to do. If I think it's a really, really good example, I'll just take pictures of it and make note of who owns the car. Because all these cars, especially in the modern era, with the way the auctions are, the provenance of all these cars can be followed. If you've got a VIN of, say, an XKE, you can push that VIN in Google and you can find out every time that car is sold in the last 10 or 15 years,
Right.
and
Right.
the events it's been in, and so on and so forth. So you can usually run the cars down. But yeah, I just, anytime I take pictures, and we don't restore just one kind of car. We restore everything. Right now
Yeah.
we've got a Ferrari in here, we've got an Alfa in here, we've got a number of Corvettes, a number of Jaguars, a Bizzarini, um, a pre-war Buick, a supercharged Auburn. So we have all this stuff, and people say, well, that's crazy. How do you keep track of it all? Well,
Yeah.
it's all nuts and bolts for one thing.
Right.
And so maybe I can't find the parts for this Jaguar or for the GT40, but I recognize that, oh, well, or a relay for a Ferrari Daytona. Well, it's the same relay as a XKE because
Right.
they shared components. So, it's like the Auburn. There's a guy here locally that has a really, really nice, totally original Studebaker. And I've gone all over that Studebaker. Well, they shared some of the same vendors.
Huh.
So just because, so you just kind of, you put those kind of things together,
Right. Sure.
and you can kind of figure out things that you may or may not, you may not be able to get it from this source, but you can get it from somebody else.
Gotcha. Jeff, are you finding that, I mean, are you finding that more and more women are getting into the hobby that are doing restorations? Do you do any for women, or, you finding that there's a bigger influx?
Not really. I wish there was. I'm very fortunate. My wife is into cars, and
Okay.
she's been into cars for a long time because she's been in the business. But we work on a lot of cars for couples, which is a
Okay.
start.
Right.
But just to do a restoration for a female, they're just not that many, And I
Hmm.
wish there was,
Yeah.
because that's a whole nother group that we could bring in, because I want to continue doing this for at least 25 more years, so or longer.
Sure.
So yeah, the more people getting into wanting restored cars, the better.
Well, I'll tell you, man, like I mean, at Hemmings, we are the collector car Bible, and we've been doing this for 60 plus years. You know what I mean? And it's very, very interesting because a lot of the owners that we have that write into us and that talk to us, they're always asking about restorations. Who do you recommend? Where would you go? Things of that nature. And a lot of times it's just simple questions. And I mean, over the last 65 years, we've got these amazing archives of imagery and things like that. Um, that I remember when I first started working and I looked upon them, I just said, "Oh my God!" I'm like, "This is truly a treasure trove of information."
Hemmings has
But
been the Bible for restorers
yeah,
for a long time.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for parts and everything, it's just I've always been enamored by how cars are restored. I remember, you know, when I first kind of got into this and filming cars and talking about cars, going to different body shops, seeing the different techniques that they use both on exterior and interior, and realizing how much work actually goes in to making a vehicle function properly and look properly, right? Whether it's,
Right.
getting I've got an old 68 Charger. I mean, that's a 6.5 foot quarter panel in the rear, and it's
Right.
black. Like, you want to make that look straight. That takes a lot of work. And
Absolutely.
seeing people who are really good at it's like anything else, right? When you see somebody that's an expert in their craft and they take those extra hours to block sand and just look and measure. I, I I take my hat off to you guys. I don't have the patience for it, but my God, am I envious of what the work that you guys do. It's simply amazing to me.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, it takes a lot of patience.
So
You have to learn patience.
yeah, I bet. Do you have one car that you've done that you wish you didn't have to get back to an
Um,
owner? Like something that's come in and you're like, I've always wanted something. I've always wanted this particular car. Or do they become, um, are you more into I just want to see it back to its originality and then moving on? Like, do you ever get attached to your projects?
oh, we get attached to every one of them. Um, my guys know, and we talk about it. Every car that we do is part of our legacy.
Yeah.
And from the day that we finish, actually the day we start the car, Jeff's Resurrections and my crew will always be attached to that car.
Yeah.
So it makes us who we are, and makes us strive for that perfection that we have to have on every single car,
Okay.
and no compromise. But if there was there's one car that I wish that I could get. A few years ago, we did a 65 XKE for a guy.
Okay.
And as I was doing the initial research, I looked at the day that the car was built. Well, it happened to be the same day I was born.
Huh.
That is the car that I would like to have.
Interesting.
More than any, because what's the chance of having a car that was built the same day?
Yeah. That actually came into your shop, no less. That's insane.
Yeah, that I actually got to restore. So, so that car will always be a part of me.
Yeah.
And always, and we, I've got some guys that have been with me for 20 plus years. And we talk about some of the cars we've done in the past all the time. And I keep on the computer, I keep records of all those cars and all the reference photos. So like currently we're doing a 68 Hemi Roadrunner. So we're looking through all of our original, B-body pictures, so we can get this detail right and that detail right. And, reminiscent about, oh yeah, remember that car? Remember, finding this and finding that, and, all kinds of crazy stuff that happens with the cars, because they all have a history and they all have a story. And we're just kind of added into that story of that particular car. And that's fun. To me, that's really cool.
I think, like I said, the fact that you guys are able to not only bring these cars back to life, but I think in many cases, make the dreams of these owners kind of real, right? Whether it's a childhood dream or just something that they've always wanted, or whatever the case is, these vehicles always leave an impression. That's pretty amazing. The fact that you've been doing it for 30 years and you want to do it for another 25 years, that's even more impressive, because I feel like you're either really a glutton for punishment or you really love what you do. And I'm hoping it's a combination of both.
It's both, for sure. It's an addiction, I think.
Oh, it's got to be. It would have to be. I mean, for you to do this every single day, and still kind of have that passion to not only do an amazing job, but improve on every single vehicle that you do. That's very admirable, man. I give you full credit, because I know me, I don't have the patience to do that. I will definitely be the guy that just absolutely loves looking at them and, hopefully to get experience to drive them, but good for you, man. So
thanks.
Jeff, let me ask you.
Yeah, I still like it.
Where can people find you? What is the best way to get in touch with you if people have questions about restorations, if they have questions about vehicles in general? How do they get in touch with you? What is the best way?
The best way is to go to our website, Jeff's Resurrections, and there's all the information's on there. And we've also got a Facebook page, so you could get in touch with me either way. Either one of those ways is the best.
Okay. Is that jeffsresurrections.com? Just go to the website?
Yes. Just go to the website, jeffsresurrections.com.
Great. Well, next time I'm in Texas, I'm coming to your shop because I need to check it out.
Yeah. Well, and one thing, I didn't get a chance to do it. You'll have to Google Louis Miller Barbecue.
Ah, okay.
This
is a barbecue restaurant, so we're going to have to do that.
Yes. Louis Miller Barbecue. He's always in the top 10 in Texas Monthly, James Beard Award winning. But he's closed, and he's one of my classmates from high school. But he's closed on Tuesday. Otherwise, I was going to have me a big plate of barbecue sitting here and to be able to offer it to you. But yeah, if you're ever in Austin or seeing Chris up in Dallas, get in touch with me, and we'll have to do that.
We will be down there. We will be down in the Dallas, Austin area next month. So plan on getting a phone call from me.
All right. Sounds good. Yeah. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I think they're closed right now just because of COVID. But after that, they're open Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Awesome.
It'll be the best
Jeff,
barbecue you've ever had.
I'm down. I'm in.
All right. Cool. All right.
Thanks,
take care.
Man.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.